Right, let's dive straight into the deep end. We start with Aristotle, confidently stating that humans are born to know. Sounds pretty universal, right? But hold on, is it really that simple? Think about it. We've all seen people seemingly content with ignorance, haven't we? And then there are the big thinkers, Nietzsche, Freud, Sartre, suggesting we actively block out uncomfortable truths. So, where does the Pyrrhonian skeptic stand on this? They'd probably just shrug and say, hold on, is that even true? They're not buying the idea that knowing is baked into our nature. Now, if Aristotle's claim is shaky, what do the Pyrrhonists themselves think? Well, look at Anaximander, the guy who really started the organized Pyrrhonian movement. He paints a picture of the ideal Pyrrhonist as someone who's actually happy because they don't claim to know anything. Imagine that, happiness found in ignorance, not enlightenment. It's a stark contrast to those poor philosophers, still wrestling with questions, tormented by their endless search. And going back even further, Pyrrho himself, the namesake, is portrayed as chillingly unconcerned with figuring out the world's nature. His lack of worry was apparently key to his legendary calm. So if Sextus Empiricus, our main man with surviving text, follows suit, does he also ditch the quest for truth? And if he does, is this state of blissful uncertainty actually better? That's the million-dollar question. Okay, so if Sextus has basically thrown in the towel on finding ultimate truth, why bother writing books? What's the point? This is the central puzzle we're tackling. You can't just write like any old philosopher, can you? Because philosophers usually present themselves as having figured something out, or at least having a solid opinion. A Pyrrhonist writer needs to be careful not to accidentally sound like they've landed on the answer. So what must they avoid? And more importantly, what special techniques do they need to develop to communicate their unique position effectively? That's the core of our investigation here. So let's get inside Sextus's head. How did he end up here? He tells us the skeptics began, just like most other thinkers, wanting to find the truth. Makes sense, right? But for them it wasn't just about truth for its own sake. Nope, discovering truth was seen as a stepping stone, a means to an end. Achieving ataraxia, that sweet spot of mental tranquility, especially when it comes to matters of opinion. Think of it like wanting to solve a puzzle not just to know the solution, but because the peace of mind you get from finishing it is what you really want. And Sextus seems to assume everyone wants that peace of mind, using it as a common ground to show how the skeptic is actually better off than everyone else who's stressed out by their beliefs. Here's where the plot thickens. The original plan was straightforward: find the truth, get your peace. But reality threw a curveball. Instead of finding clear answers, the skeptic fell into disagreement of equal strength. Imagine being hit with two equally convincing arguments, or seeing two equally plausible interpretations of the same event. You can't pick one over the other, they just sit there, balanced against each other. The Greek word enipesis suggests this wasn't planned, maybe even unwelcome initially. But wait, there's a twist. When faced with these evenly matched contenders, you just can't decide. You have to suspend judgment. And guess what? This very suspension, this inability to commit, is exactly what brings about the tranquility they were originally chasing. It's described as happening touchikos, often translated as by chance or fortuitously. It feels like a lucky break, an unexpected bonus. So, this suspension of judgment leading to tranquility isn't just a one-off fluke. Sextus describes it as a reliable technique, a skeptical ability. Check out this famous definition from pH 1.8. The skeptical ability is one that produces oppositions among things that appear and things that are thought, one from which, because of the equal strength in the opposing objects and accounts, we come first to suspension of judgment, and after that to tranquility. See the flow? You deliberately create or encounter opposing viewpoints or pieces of evidence. These oppositions are balanced, neither side clearly wins. This balance forces you into suspension. And that suspension reliably leads to tranquility. It's almost like a recipe for inner peace. Stir in conflicting ideas, let them simmer equally, and voila, calmness emerges. Now, let's apply this to specific fields like physics. Does Sextus try to figure out the actual workings of the cosmos? Nope. His purpose in discussing physics or logic or ethics is explicitly stated in pH 119, for the sake of opposing to every argument an equal argument and for the sake of tranquility. He's not trying to build a model of the universe, he's engaging in a practice designed to generate that intellectual equipoise. He tackles the same subjects as everyone else, but the why and how are completely different. Interestingly, he sometimes refuses to call his own activity philosophy. Why? Maybe because he assumes philosophers think they know stuff? Or perhaps, more radically, because philosophia, love of wisdom, doesn't fit the bill. For the skeptic, it's not about loving wisdom per se, but about mastering the art of creating balance to achieve tranquility. It's less about the destination and more about the balancing act itself. Okay, hold on a second. There's a bit of a snag here. We've been talking about Sextus as this master of suspension, this guy who generates stalemates. But the word skeptic itself means inquirer. Right at the beginning of his main work, he says the skeptic is still investigating, still searching for truth, unlike those who think they've found it or those who say it's impossible. How can you be both an inquirer chasing truth and someone whose main gig is producing suspension? It seems contradictory. Casey Perrin argues that maybe the description of the skeptical ability in pH 1.8 is compatible with both goals. But I'm unconvinced. That passage sounds laser-focused on creating opposition and achieving suspension. And the Physax page, it explicitly rejects truth-seeking. To me, the idea of the skeptic as an ongoing inquirer feels like a leftover label, maybe useful for distinguishing them from dogmatists, but not reflecting the core of their practice as Sextus describes it. So if not inquiry, then what is the heart of Sextus's practice? It's suspension. He consistently portrays his activity as deliberately setting up opposing arguments or impressions to force a state of suspension. Look at how he introduces the modes. These are like pre-packaged tools specifically designed to generate doubt and suspension. He even states the fundamental principle of the skeptical community. Above all, there being an equal argument opposed to every argument. That's about creating the conditions for suspension, not about finding the right answer. Similar ideas pop up throughout his works. Yes, being an inquirer is part of the identity, but the detailed mechanics of what he actually does involve cultivating this state of non-commitment. It's less about asking questions to find answers, and more about asking questions to keep yourself balanced. Alright, so if Sextus isn't trying to convince us of any particular truth, what's the point of his massive writings? Most philosophers write to lead their readers to conclusions, right? But Sextus is different. His goal isn't to push you towards a specific belief. Instead, his writing is an act of generating or maintaining suspension of judgment. How does writing help with that? Primarily, his works are a demonstration of the skeptical method in action. By presenting opposing arguments side by side, he's showing the reader how to experience that state of equipoise. It's like practicing suspension by reading about it. Of course, there's also an instructional element, but the core function is illustrative. But these aren't just private notes. Sextus is writing for an audience. Unlike Marcus Aurelius's meditations, which feel like personal reflections, Sextus's tone is more like imparting knowledge. Who is he writing for, and what message is he sending? Several possibilities emerge. First, he's clearly defending skepticism against critics, showing it's not crazy or impractical. Second, he's explaining the whole system to newcomers, orienting readers unfamiliar with the skeptical approach. Third, there's a therapeutic angle. Maybe he wants to convert dogmatists, offering a cure for their certainty. He even calls skeptics philanthropic in one spot. Whether he genuinely believes this is debatable, but it hints at a desire to help others. Finally, he might be supplying fellow skeptics with ammunition, detailed arguments to use in their own ongoing practice of maintaining suspension. Likely, he had multiple audiences in mind. So knowing his goal is to foster suspension, not conclusions, how does Sextus actually write? The key is to avoid giving the impression that he's winning an argument or arriving at a definitive answer. He needs to create a sense of stalemate, of being stuck between equally valid points. How does he pull this off? Partly through the arguments he chooses. He even admits to varying their strength depending on the opponent's commitments. But crucially, it's also about how he presents everything. He needs linguistic tools, stylistic choices that signal this balanced non-committal stance. Interestingly, this careful presentation might also serve the inquirer persona, as both the inquirer and the suspenders of judgment are, by definition, not having reached firm conclusions. What about his actual style? Honestly, it's pretty standard ancient Greek prose, clear, functional, gets the job done without trying too hard to impress. It's simpler in the outlines, since it's a summary. But the real magic lies in his vocabulary, specifically the skeptical phrases. These are his verbal shields against making dogmatic claims. Phrases like, I suspend judgment, I determine nothing, I do not apprehend, perhaps, it is possible. These aren't just hedging bets. According to Sextus, they're meant to reveal his state of mind, his feeling of equipoise between opposing views. They signal that he's not asserting anything definite about the world, but rather reporting his own inability to decide. Even seemingly strong statements like everything is undetermined are used carefully to indicate his personal stance, not a universal claim about reality. It's a linguistic strategy to keep the reader hovering in that suspended state. So, wrapping it up, Sextus Empiricus, despite giving up on finding truth, uses his writing as a sophisticated tool to cultivate and demonstrate the Pyrrhonian path, systematically creating intellectual balance through opposition, leading ultimately to tranquility. His works are both a practical guide and a philosophical performance of this very process.